Fox News alert, police are still on the hunt for Nancy Guthrie. No leads, no suspect, and no idea where she is. There hasn't been a press conference in almost 2 months. So now Savannah's stepping in. She returned to the Today Show and spilled new details about the case. Listen.
We thought that she must have had like some kind of medical episode in the night, and that somehow, you know, the paramedics had come because the back doors were propped open, you know, and that didn't make any sense.
Wait, so when the family got to the house, the back door was open? Why didn't the cops tell us that? Savannah's brother's a military guy, and the moment he heard mom was missing, he knew what it was.
He saw very clearly right away what this was. Yeah. And even on the phone, when I called him, he knew. He knew. And he said, I think she's been kidnapped for ransom.
The brother should be leading the case instead of the sheriff. The Guthries were dealing with a lot, like figuring out if all the ransom notes were real or not.
There are a lot of different notes, I think, that came. And I think most of them, it's my understanding, are not real. The 2 notes that we received, that we responded to, I tend to believe those are real.
Money is usually the motive behind a kidnapping, and Savannah's blaming herself.
I don't know that it's because she's my mom and somebody thought, oh, that girl, that lady has money, we can make a quick buck, which is too much to bear. To think that I brought this to her bedside, that it's because of me.
All of our hearts break, and I feel so horrible that Savannah is blaming herself. I'm sure you guys do as well. But I want to dissect a little bit more about this interview and why it took so long. What took so long? And what do I mean by that? I mean 2 things. Why would it take Sheriff and Nanos and his team more than 2 minutes? I don't know. I'm not a detective. I've never been, in that kind of a situation. And so we would all react a little bit differently, but let's go through what we've just learned. Oh, and by the way, this is video 2, Friday, March 27th, 12:17 p.m. Eastern. Go watch the first video I launched earlier on the blood. I'll connect these 2. But let's go back to the storyline. I can't really get just whether or not Annie and Tommaso arrived at 11 or they arrived at noon. We're not clear, but you're going to hear in a second from this clip that there was 9 minutes. So I want to know what took so long, 1, for the police to not clue in that she didn't just walk out the door. You can hear Savannah in this interview stating she kind of had to convince the police. The family was like, she couldn't have wandered. She couldn't stand up and walk for the better part of most days, let alone wander out the door. And that's disturbing. How is it that we're learning now that some of these officers have no homicide experience, that were there because Nanos benched the people with experience because he's an arrogant ASS at best? But to, I don't know. I feel like my 4-year-old, 5-year-old grandkids could realize the back door is propped open. She's not inside. Her purse is inside. Her cell phone's inside. She's missing. And there's blood on the front stoop and blood at the other side of the front door. The doors are propped open and she's nowhere to be found. So let's go look for her with search dogs and everything. I get that initially because maybe somebody murdered her and then dumped her. I get that to a certain extent. But then we returned the crime scene within a day. What took them so long? That Savannah tells us, which I'm going to, reiterate here in her interview, that Chris in the interview room last night, everybody referenced. She's pleading. It's like the reason they're jumping to the theory and the conclusion. I don't think they're wrong here. Why did Savannah call the senator? Annie calls Savannah and tells her the story. And that's the other why it took so long. I'd like to know why it took so long to call 911, number one, why it took so long for the police to exercise this as not somebody wandering out the door actions. And three, why it took so long for Annie to call Savannah. These are what I want to talk about. These three things. Why it took so long. What took so long. And I'm not trying to be critical, but we can hear in her interview, Savannah's basically saying, like, this isn't that case. She didn't just wander out the door. So Chris and his crew last night eloquently pieced together a theory that plausibly makes a hell of a lot of sense. We know she called the senator. We know she wasn't contacted for a couple of hours at bare minimum after Annie and Tommaso arrive. And they're probably trying to essentially maybe piece together like, hey, she couldn't have walked. This is something that you're not, looking at clearly here. This is not a typical wandering case. And maybe they're not getting through to Nanos and his, hard head. Although I don't even know that he was there. But they're maybe trying to convince police officers, law enforcement officers that have never worked a homicide. They said, this ain't that woman. This ain't the mom that wandered off. And then so she has to call the senator to go like, hello, like we need help here. We need people that have true investigative eyes. That's what I think happened. But so why and what took so long? Well, I think we can answer the first question, because we've heard it over and over and over again, that the people that had the most experience and still do have the most experience in this case are benched in Pima County and not working homicide. And we've heard reports that potentially 1 to 2 years experience. And that I heard maybe that somebody that arrived had 0 homicide experience. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. Now let's fast forward to what took so long to call 911. Watch this first.
All right, mommy.
Savannah wanted to post $1 million as a reward as soon as her mom went missing, but the cops reportedly said no. It would flood the case with false leads. But now it looks like the case has gone cold. The security footage didn't help catch the kidnapper, but it gave the family nightmares.
I mean, it's just absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
It's just totally terrifying. And I can't imagine that is who she saw standing over her bed.
That was the last real update on the case. Nothing came from the video except rumors. People started pointing fingers at the family. The Guthries heard that, and it hit hard.
It's unbearable.
Yeah.
No one took better care of my mom than my sister and brother-in-law. And no one protected my mom more than my brother. And we love her, and she is our shining light. She's our matriarch. She's all we have.
Police have no clue who took Nancy. The DNA they recovered, still sitting in a lab in Florida. The sheriff says they still have to look through thousands of videos. He swears the case isn't cold, but the family's desperate, and they need closure.
We need answers. We cannot be at peace without knowing. And someone can do the right thing. And it is never too late to do the right thing. And our hearts are focused on that.
Stuart Kaplan's a former FBI agent. Stuart, when you hear her say the door was open when they first found out the mom was missing, why are we hearing about this now?
You know, Jesse, I watched this interview several times, in fact, multiple times today with some of my colleagues, and we really tore it apart. And for the life of us, there are a lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers. And I don't have an answer for why we are just hearing about the back door. But let me just quickly go through several points. Number one is Savannah Guthrie tells us that when her sister calls her, when first calls her, Savannah goes, "You better call the police." Well, the sister says, "No, the police are here already." You know, Jesse, using common sense, if a loved one goes missing, the first thing you're going to do is call or text the people that are closest to that person to find out if you've heard from that person. That in and of itself seems a little odd to me as to why the sister or brother or anybody did not reach out to Savannah Guthrie prior to calling the police or while they were waiting for the police. There's about a 12-minute gap between the time 911 is called to the time the police arrive. That's number one.
Okay, I agree. 9 minutes between the time they arrive and 911 is called. What took so long? You drive into your mom's home, the home you were raised in, the one you're presumably at a bare minimum, I would say weekly, because we hear that they have Saturday night dinners routinely, and that Savannah's saying they were amazing caretakers. So you drive up, you see, presumably you go in the house. Where would you go in the house? You'd be running around the house. You go into the bedroom. You'd see the doors propped open and wide open. You would see the blood on the front step. You run around the house. Maybe you're looking around for your mom outside, and then you see blood on the front step. You see your mom's purse and phone there, and mom is nowhere to be found. Does that take 9 minutes? I don't think so. For 2 adults? It's just interesting. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Keep listening.
Number two is this would be the last scenario of an 84-year-old lady who has physical limitations that anybody would contemplate kidnapping for a ransom. There was nothing that would have been consistent at the very onset to lead anybody to believe that Nancy Guthrie was the target of a kidnapping for ransom. That statement in and of itself causes me to now have a lot of questions as to how someone would have even gotten to that point from just being on the phone prior to showing up. Number three is Savannah Guthrie offered later on in her interview with some very specific facts that her mother left the house in her pajamas without her shoes. How did Savannah Guthrie know that at the time her mother left the house, she was clothed in her pajamas without her shoes on? That leads me to believe that law enforcement perhaps has other video that, quite frankly, they have not disclosed. Unless Nancy Guthrie only had one pair of shoes in that house, how would anybody be able to know that she left the house without her shoes on? That's a very specific material fact, and it caused us to pause and wonder. There's a lot of things that we just don't know.
You know, you bring up 3 really interesting observations. I don't, you know, I'm not an investigator, but you know how these things go, and I can't explain the things that you're raising either. The notes, the 2 notes, she says, she still believes those weren't hoaxes. Well, what does that tell you?
She not only said that 2 of the ransom notes with specificity she believes are real, she actually also suggested that it was one kidnapper. She never refers to individuals, meaning plural. If you go back and listen to her interview, she talks about one person. And so that leads me to believe that in those ransom notes, and again, there may have been some clues within those notes. By way of example, we took your mom in her pajamas. You will notice that those pajamas are not there. We took her without her shoes. Her shoes or her slippers are still by her bedside. And so there is some specific facts that are known to law enforcement that, quite frankly, they're keeping very close to the vest. I will just say this to you, that this interview, I don't think helped the investigation. In fact, if anything, I think it may have hurt. I think it also may have hurt their credibility because there are just things that just, quite frankly, don't add up. And statistically, these cases generally lead back to someone who's within that inner circle.
Wow, that's a strong statement, Stuart. We'll see how it plays out. Why would, putting the credibility issue aside, why would this interview hurt the investigation?
I'm not saying that it hurts the investigation, but I do believe that less is more, because the more information you let out to the general public, and obviously there is an individual, at least one individual, because we saw them on that Ring doorbell, it gives that person an individual to backtrack and perhaps cover his or her tracks. And
Okay. So you know, he finds it really curious that the first thing go-to is from Cameron that there was a ransom kidnapping here. I don't know. What does Cameron know within the family unit? We don't know. That's a really interesting question. But he also mentions most cases go back to the inner circle and the family. And he also questions the time, the 9 minutes. But I want to show you another clip from the interview room that shows also what I was saying about the time it took and why it took so long to call Savannah. Why?
Well, I'm wondering how did they prop open the doors?
We don't know that yet.
How would that
Great
happen?
question.
I mean, that's to me the obvious question.
Yeah, is it something they found in the house? Did they come with door stops? They went to Ace Hardware and picked up door stops first. Did they use rocks? And if we would know that this was something that was brought to the scene, this would give us some indication that there was at least some level of higher planning. But yeah, if we don't know what the doors were propped open with.
Well, and let's go back to the suspectology here, who has been allegedly surveilling this house for weeks. And part of the plan is, let's prop open 2 doors.
Mm-hmm.
And where did they, with the propped open 2 doors, where did the sheriff come off with in the very beginning? Well, this was a burglary. We thought it was a burglary.
Right? What took so long? Keep listening.
But yeah, if we don't know what the doors were propped open with.
Well, and let's go back to the suspectology here, who has been allegedly surveilling this house for weeks. And part of the plan is, let's prop open 2 doors.
Mm-hmm.
And where did they, with the propped open 2 doors, where did the sheriff come off with in the very beginning? Well, this was a burglary. We thought it was a burglary. So let's prop open the 2 doors and not take anything. And let's bring a full pack so we can't put anything in our pack. Am I missing something?
Well, regarding the sheriff's comments, the presumption would be he actually understood what was going on at the scene. And if he has somebody that's providing him with flawed information, then that's what he's going to say. Or if he doesn't understand what's being told to him and he misinterprets the information, then that's what he's going to say. But I don't think if any of us showed up at a scene where a woman of that age was missing and we saw doors propped open, that my first thought would be, sounds like a burglary to me.
Gotta love John. And he and Bob Gilliam and Chris have years, decades of combined experience in law enforcement. Keep listening. And Bob Gilliam confirms that same sentiment. Listen in.
You think? I mean, if you saw the blood on the porch and the 2 propped open doors, if from an investigative analysis aspect, in all of your experience, what's going through your mind?
Well, we probably have a crime. It's not she wandered away into the desert situation, and I'm going to treat it as a crime scene at that point. Now, my understanding is a deputy, one of the first responding deputies making a perimeter search. Remember that they searched the entire residence, high and low, for her. The deputies did, that is, when they first got there.
So
we don't know how. Pardon me?
So did the family.
Yes, and they probably, well, they could have had one or both of the family members walking with them, or perhaps a single deputy through the house to show them around and to see if there's anything that appears to be disturbed. So that's part of the initial investigation. But when you walk around and you see the blood, okay, that may not be completely alarming to me at this point, because maybe she fell down and cut her head, and maybe we're going to find her next door in the neighbor's yard. We don't know. But at some point, they also determined that there was other evidence in there to indicate that there was some type of crime that occurred. We know that from what Nano said, if we can believe what he said at this point. So to answer your question, yeah, I'm going to treat it. I'm not exactly sure at what point I'm going to treat it as a crime scene, but probably not too long after I arrive, I'm going to say, there's more to this than meets the eye. This is not a search and rescue situation. And then I'm going to run it up the chain. So I'm going to call the watch commander. Let's say I'm the sergeant there. I'm going to call the watch commander, who's probably a lieutenant, and start get the ball rolling up the chain.
Yep. And so to answer this question, if she tried to run through the front door, the blood spatter does not line up because it goes all the way out onto towards the street. It goes
And
on the
she's
fence.
probably going to step in some of that too, you know.
Yeah, you're going to see that. And yeah, great point. She's going to be walking, because we also are going to hear, some more information that we didn't know.
Yeah, so let's listen in a little bit more. I just wanted to include that because I didn't talk about that in the video this morning. Go watch it if you missed it on Let's Talk About the Blood. But yeah, doesn't look like any footsteps in the blood. But Karen also now questions the time that I want to talk about now that it took for Annie and Tommaso to call Savannah. Listen in. And again, we're all different. I'm not trying to beat the family up, but I know some have commented on how it's very unprofessional to comment on this, but I think it's actually the opposite. I think it's reckless and unprofessional to not look at every single avenue. And when you hear a statistic like we just heard from the Fox News clip, when most of it, 90-something%, goes back to the inner circle, I think it's irresponsible not to ask these questions. And that's why I think, Chris and his team of, they're just reporting neutrally, but it seems to always come back to the same sort of inner circle potential, or at least, maybe not direct inner, but somebody with inside information, right? But let's listen into this, because I also find it, again, it's just me, but I just, if I think with, well, I have had my dad walk out on me. But because he was with me in the home and I knew he was just wandering on the streets, I'm panicked and looking for him, calling 911 if I didn't find him in a few seconds. But if I was to walk in my dad's home and he was 84 and he lived on his own and his purse or wallet was there, the cell phone was there, blood at the front door, back doors propped open, and he had a bad back and he could barely get out of bed, I guess I would be calling probably my siblings first to say, hey, what the hell? This is what we just got here. This is what we're seeing. Have you heard from mom? No. Okay. Call 911. That's just me. That's just me. But that's not what went down. And I want you to hear this, because it wasn't like it was a delay of 10 minutes or so, at least not in my assessment, and not in theirs either. Listen in. Okay. I want you to listen to this clip because it tells us what they're thinking about two of these three delays I'm talking about now. Listen up.
And do a little more thought here. And what do you guys think in the chat? We love your thoughts that are coming in here. This is what we would call an investigative analysis gap. There are gaps in the stories that come forward. So the next thing you want to start looking for is who's introducing concepts to the investigation. And why is that important? Because too much information is just that. Too much information. Most of the time when, there's trauma involved and there's a trauma response where people go, I don't know. I just don't remember. I'm not sure. Okay. And then once they start to come down, in the interview, you start seeing them going, okay, I remember this, I remember that. And that's what you call a cognitive interview. Because you want them to slow down, you want them to breathe, you want them to think a little bit more, and you don't want pressures. In this case, Annie calls 911 and immediately then calls Savannah in New York and says, Mom is missing, she's gone. And Savannah responds, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Savannah's response is a trauma response. What are you talking about? What's going on here? Okay. Annie is calling. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I was just going to say perhaps a sign of disbelief. What do you mean? Yeah. Trauma,
right?
As you said. Yeah.
Right. And Annie is at the house saying the cops are there searching, but they have already been searching themselves. So let's pick it back up.
and that didn't make any sense. We thought maybe they came and there was a stretcher and they took her out the back, but her phone was there and her purse was.
We just heard from Savannah go, that didn't make any sense. Okay. That she would have just walked out of the house, or maybe there was a hospital event of some sort. That means they were talking about it on the phone. Because she makes a comment here about, we already called the hospitals. So why would Thomas and Annie call the hospitals and then tell her sister, we already called the hospitals?
There and all her things, and it just didn't make any sense. So, you know, Annie and Tommy had already called all the hospitals, but then I'm like, oh, I'm going to call the hospital. So then I started.
Why would she do that?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I get,
Yeah.
this may disappoint a small point of clarification, but the way Savannah's laying this out is she gets the phone call from Annie saying, Mom's missing, Mom's gone. Savannah's response is, okay, call 911. Annie said, we already did that. They're already here. And now they're having a conversation of, well, could she be at a hospital? And she's saying the two of them already called all the hospitals. At what point did Savannah get the phone call? This sounds like it was a half an hour to an hour past when they discovered Nancy was missing. I can't tell.
Try and call a hospital and try and get the information.
You're on hold.
Yeah, you're on hold, and then you'll get somebody. You'll be transferred someplace else, and so you're right. You're looking at a minimum of 30 minutes from the arrival of law enforcement.
Yeah, and it's just, again, it goes to the timeline, but when did they call Savannah to let Savannah know? It doesn't sound like they called 911 and then the next call was Savannah. It sounds like they were on the phone for quite a while with hospitals. The way Savannah's laying this out, I could be missing something.
Okay, you know what else this tells us? They may have seen the blood.
That's true, and it also tells us that if Savannah is basically going back and making contact with the hospitals herself, I'd submit this suggests that she doesn't trust her sister to have done things properly.
Great point. She has to check for herself.
Great point. And now let's say the first officer on the scene, my mother's.
Again, I am not trying to beat up the family, but it's irresponsible to ignore all these questions. It's irresponsible, and it looks like the sheriff has done exactly that. He's jumped to a conclusion at the beginning that the family likely had to, from the sounds of it, convince, if you will, that, this isn't your regular mom that just walks out the door. We've got to ask these questions. We've got to ask, why 9 minutes before 911 was called? Why would somebody have blood at the front stoop if the back doors were wide open? Why are you calling the hospitals and not calling your sister? I don't know. What do you think? Maybe I'm being a little harsh. It just seems like there's so many weird aspects to this case that just get weirder and weirder and weirder. And the more we hear, the more questions it raises. It's so bizarre. Tell me what you think below. Love and light. Thank you for being here.